We want to welcome you here today. My name is Jason. I'm the executive pastor here. And if you're a guest with us, we're so glad that you're here. One of the things that our pastor, Pastor Aaron, asks of every guest is to try us out 3 times. If you give us 3 times, maybe you don't get the full experience on the first time, but 3 times kind of gives you a better picture of who we are as a church. And if you might be a fit, we also want to welcome those joining us online. And today I have a great message, as Tabby said, is a part of this series, but this is a message that I've been preparing for some time, and I asked Pastor Aaron if I could share this special message with you for today. And it correlates with a special time in my life that we're celebrating, my wife and I. This Tuesday, we are celebrating 25 years of marriage. Will be our 25th wedding anniversary. Yeah, we will be going out of town after next Sunday. We'll be heading out for a week and able to enjoy that. But and I think I have a couple of pictures here that you can see from our wedding. We were young. We were young. Yeah, babies. Yes, that's right. I think we have another picture of cake, eating the cake. I think feeding the cake. There you go. Look at that young guy with hair. Someone said that, you had hair. I'm like, I think I still do. But, you know, my wife and I are celebrating 25 years. And we met at the same church we actually wound up getting married at. My dad was in the Army at the time and was getting out of the Army. And so we moved back to Missouri where we were from. And we were trying out churches just like we say to do. My family was going to church and finding, and I'm the oldest of 9 kids. At that time, it was 7 of us. They were trying to find a church for our family where we could worship together. And so we went to this church, and one of the things we would do is we'd go on Sunday, but then we'd find out when they had youth. And so for our students, our student ministry. And so we went to their student ministry. Me and my 2 brothers were old enough to go, and I drove them there. And you know, I always had even though I was in high school, my youth pastor said, hey, someday you're going to get married, and what you need to do is create a list. Now, again, I didn't even realize, I was way too young to be thinking about that. It's like 16, 17. That's way too young to be talking about that. But here I was writing a list and wrote this list and go into the church and meet this girl. She's leading worship. She's up there leading worship. And I'm like, yeah, she loves the Lord, worships the Lord, check. She said she wanted to be in ministry someday, and I knew that God was calling me to be in ministry, check. She's beautiful, check. She's funny, check. She laughs when I tell jokes, check. And all these other things. She values God. She values church. Her family is supportive of her call to ministry, just like my family was. And so, she met a lot of check boxes, and about a year later, we started dating. We dated for a couple years before we got married. Right after she finished high school, we wound up getting married, which, again, very young. I have a daughter who's older than I was when I got married, and I'm like, not recommended, do not. Not to say that we made a mistake or anything like that, but it was young. I will go ahead and acknowledge that right off the front end. And I remember we started dating and getting to know one another. Our first date was at Six Flags, that's what you do when you're a teenager, and just walking through this process. And I love what Pastor Steve Robinson a couple weeks ago talked about. We're in the process. We're in the process. We're not done. We are maturing. We're not yet mature. We are growing still. We're still working. And sometimes it's been great, and sometimes it's not been great. And I remember our vows were, in sickness and in health. And I'm like, I hope it's more health than sickness, right? You're like, in good times and bad times, I'm like, yeah, I'll take the good times. You can keep the bad times. But what I realized all these years later is there's a lot of that. There's some bad times. There's some good times. There is some sick times. There is some healthy times. There is some times where we had enough. And there's lots of times where we did not have enough. And again, that is part. And so what I want to share with you today is generally just 5 things that God has shown me I don't think I know it all. I'm not the expert on marriage. I'm sure there's people here who have been married longer and maybe have a better marriage. But here's just 5 things that God has shown me over the years. Now, I could make that 2,500, but we don't want to go that long today. When I first started writing this message, I wrote down 25 things right off the top of my head. And I was like, 25 things for 20. I mean, 5 things is going to be more than enough. I get it. And so this is a little bit different message today, but I want to just share from my heart with you. The number one thing, and again, these aren't a list of an order, but the first thing is that the 5 things that God's shown me along the way is to enjoy the journey. As we are on this process, we're on this journey, we must enjoy the journey. And Paul wrote in Philippians 4, he writes this, "Rejoice in the Lord always, and again, I say rejoice." We'll come back to Philippians 4 here in just a minute, but Paul was saying, at all times in our lives, we must rejoice. That's the same word as enjoy the journey. And so we enjoy the journey. And I remember when we got married, again, because we were so young, we had no money, right? I was going to go to Bible college. We were working all that out, learning to be ministry, doing those things. Was a part of a church that we were volunteering at and just really learning and growing in apprenticeship and all those things. And so we didn't have a lot of money, so we paid for the wedding. We didn't have families that could pay for anything, so we paid for it all ourselves. So we did what we could afford on our honeymoon. We went camping. Right, tent camping, not even like glamping. I mean, we're talking about camping with a tent. And so we lived in Missouri at the time, and I was like, hey, when I grew up, we went to this one campground in Oklahoma, and we're going to go to hang out in Oklahoma City, do some things around there, and let's do that. I mean, like, we're at the top of the line, camping, And so I got my car loaded up the day after we got married, and we're going to drive down, and I'm riding along on the turnpike. It's a manual. I'm shifting, driving along, go through the toll booth, and we're about halfway in between Oklahoma City and Tulsa, coming past Tulsa. We're not yet to Oklahoma City, middle of nowhere. All of a sudden, it's not shifting. I'm press it harder, press the clutch. It's not working. We break down on the turnpike. Now here, 25 years ago, we had no cell phones. Like you had it made if you had a cell phone 25 years ago, and it was big if you did have one. It was like a suitcase, And so we're here, and we're like, what do we do? Like, we don't know anybody here. You're not supposed to walk on the turnpike. So what are we supposed to do? We're stranded. Somebody stops, and like a trucker, like, oh, you want to do this? And I'm like, I tried that. It don't work. It didn't work. So someone comes and picks us up, takes us to the thing we could call. Somebody eventually came and picked us up 10 hours later. It was 110 degrees. We're out there. That's not a great way to start, y'all. It's not a great way to start. And we're just like, this is the worst, and we're sweating. We're losing like 10 pounds. We're out there. This is terrible. Now, eventually, we had a great time on our honeymoon, and it was, we went to amusement parks and camped. And I know some of y'all are like, how could you have a great time? You were camping. And it was hot, and we swam, and we did all those things. And here's a picture we took on our honeymoon, actually, right? That's the picture. That's a picture we took there. You can see again how young we look, and we just went to one of those photo booth things. I love you. Now, looking back 25 years later, at that time that we were not having a great time. But when we look back 25 years later, I would say this. People always say, like, oh, don't you wish you got to go somewhere? Man, I wouldn't trade it for the world. To look back to the perspective changed the way that I viewed that event. In the moment, I wasn't saying, rejoice in the Lord always, because I wasn't mature enough to do that. I wasn't saying, thank God it's 110 out here and nobody's stopping. And I don't have a cell phone that I don't even know exists. Thank God we had to wait 10 hours. But looking back, I say, wow, God did some amazing things in our lives when we had nothing. And I think we get so caught up in the moment of like talking about what we don't have or how things could be that we don't enjoy the moment. As I mentor and coach young leaders and pastors and wannabe pastors, I was talking to this one guy, and he's like, man, I could be a great leader for God, but And that's usually whatever happens after the but is not going to be good. He goes, I just wish I didn't have any kids. And I'm like, okay, help me unpack that. He goes, I would be a great leader if I didn't have kids. Because, man, I could be leading all here and doing all this if I just didn't have these kids. And I'm like, well, maybe what God is doing is seeing if you can be a leader to those kids first. Because if you can't lead them, the Bible is pretty clear. What I realize is sometimes leading my kids is much easier than leading y'all. Just saying. And neither of them is easy. Maybe we say, if I had more stuff, if I had more money, if I had this, if I had that. You know, I go back to those times where we were married and we had nothing. I wish I could go back to those times where we had no TV. Man, I love it. We had so much time to do whatever we wanted to do. Maybe it's if I had better health, if I had a better situation. But perspective helps us see that we can rejoice in all times. And what Paul goes on to write in verse 11 of that same chapter in Philippians, he says this. He goes, not that I speak in regard to need. Because he talks about how God meets our need. He goes, for I have learned in whatever state I am in to be content, to enjoy the journey. You say, well, yeah, he doesn't know my life. Well, you know, have you ever been falsely imprisoned? Maybe there's somebody here who has. For years? Okay, here's one I know that nobody here has had. Have you had a bunch of dudes say, hey, we're not going to eat until we kill you? You might have some enemies, but at least they stop and get some Popeyes, some Chick-fil-A. He had guys who said, I promise, I'm swearing before the whole church, we ain't going to stop until we kill him. And we're not even going to eat. Wow, he had a bad day. He was shipwrecked. He was in prison. He was falsely accused, beaten. He said, I'm content in whatever state I'm in. He wrote that from prison. He was living that out. So we have to enjoy the journey. The next thing that I've learned is don't compete. Don't compete. Don't compete. Especially this is a big one when it comes to marriage, and I believe that you could really take any of these principles and apply them to whatever stage you're at in life, whether you're married, divorced, widowed, never going to be married, 12. It doesn't matter where you're at in life, you could apply these principles, right? And so don't compete. And we find ourselves, especially in marriage, competing with our spouse. But here's what I've learned over the years and God has shown me. Here's the two conditions of a marriage. It's either both of y'all are winning or both of y'all are losing. There is no, I'm winning, she losing. She's winning, I'm losing. No. We either both winning or we're both losing. There is no win-lose. It's either win-win or lose-lose. Because what Jesus said, what the scriptures show us, is that what he wrote in what was written in Matthew 9, verse 19, verse 6, he says, so then, they are no longer two, but one flesh. They are one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So he's saying they're one. So what I do to my wife, I do to me. What happens to my wife happens to me. And so I learned that as a young man. Here was the way I was competing with my wife. And this could look like a lot of different things. It could look like one-upmanship. It could look like expectations that aren't right. Like, hey, I did this for you. You need to do this. I'm winning. You're losing. I won the argument. You lost the argument. No, y'all both lost. Or you both won. There's no in between. For me, what it looked like, and everybody gasped in first service, and y'all can gasp too, is I just thought, I'm supposed to be the funny man, and I'm supposed to make people laugh. So, I was always Comedy Central roasting my wife, making fun of her, teasing her. I just thought that was just what we do, hey, I gotta get, hey, look how cool I am. I won. I made everybody laugh. I got the best laugh of the night. But I didn't realize is if I cut my wife down, I was cutting myself down because we're one. I wasn't winning, I was losing, and I was making her lose. And so I had to learn that. And so, I love what Pastor Aaron said in a message on marriage. He's like, united, we are undefeated. There's strength in unity. Going back to Ecclesiastes, he says, again, this is Solomon writing, if two lie down together, Ecclesiastes 4:11, will they keep warm? But how can one be warm alone? In other words, there's power together. There's power together. So we don't compete with one another because we are a part of one another. We are together in that. And so we enjoy the journey. We don't compete. And number 3, and this is one that can work for every area of life, be Christ-centered. Be Christ-centered. What does it mean to be Christ-centered in our marriage, in our relationships, in our workplace, in our homes? Is this, 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about this. He says it this way. He goes, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think of anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God. Today, there's a lot of self-help doctrine in our world and in the church. And self-help doctrine says this: you are enough. You are great. You are marvelous. You are wonderful. You are sufficient. You are more than enough. You are the hero of your life. But that's not what the Bible says. That's not what Paul said. He said, in my insufficiency is where God's sufficiency. And so as over the years, what I've realized is in a marriage, this is what happens, is my wife has needs, I have needs, and I'm trying to be sufficient enough for her. And we were just talking about this again later. We've talked about this multiple times. It's like, whether it's in my marriage or now that I've got a grown kid, I realize, like, man, I didn't do everything right. As a pastor for 24 years, I realized, boy, I haven't done everything right. I've let some people down. I've said some things I wish I could not say again. Done some things I wish I could not do again. Being very vulnerable here, right? But what that leads me to is not self-help, but Christ-centered help. Understanding this is I'm not the hero of this marriage. Christ is. I'm not the hero of my kids. Oh, I know every dad wants to be their kid's hero. But I want to point them to Christ. That where I am their hero, it is in my submission and understanding that where I am insufficient, I'm leaning into the sufficiency of Christ. That I'm leaning into His power. That what I realize is I'm not enough for my wife. That doesn't mean I'm not going to take steps to be better and to grow and to mature and be along that process. But at the end of the day, I'm not enough for my kids. But Christ is. I'm not enough for my wife, but Christ is. I am limited. He is unlimited. And what does that look like? It means it doesn't have to be my way. It can be Christ's way. It doesn't even have to be her way. It can be His way. It doesn't have to be my plans or her plans. It could be His plan. It doesn't have to be my opinions or her opinions. It's His opinions. That's what living Christ-centered looks like. And Paul wrote again in Galatians of what this looks like. He said this: I have been crucified with Christ. People say, what's the symbol of a good marriage? It's death. The cross. Dying to our own self and being alive to Christ. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh by the faith in the Son of God who loved in me and gave Himself for me. That's what being Christ-centered is giving ourselves for others, because that's what He did for us. It doesn't have to be I can die to my plan. I can die to my ways. I can die to my opinions. And my wife is submitting to Christ at the same level. When we come together, it puts Christ at the center. It puts Christ at the center. So we enjoy the journey. We don't compete. We're being Christ-centered. Number 4 is we put the other first. Again, these are just things. Again, you could apply these in any area of life. We can put the other first, whether it's a relationship, business, parenting. In Romans, it's written here. It says this in Romans 12:10. He says, "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love." Again, he's not even speaking to marriage here, but this principle works. "In honor, giving preference to one another." In other words, I'm going to put the other first. There's a principle that says this: seek to understand, then be understood. Most marriage counseling would not happen if we lived out that principle. I'm saying from my experience of 24 years of being a pastor now, most of the things would be solved if if one person understood the other person. It's always like, I don't understand you. You see things differently than I do. You say things differently than I do. You have different hopes and dreams than I do. That's what I hear. You have different expectations than I do. Hear that all the time. Where you have one family of origin, and maybe it's the guy. This happens a lot, I see. He grew up, this is an example, not a real case that's happened millions of times. He grew up in a family where mom had the food on the table by 5 o'clock every day. And she grew up in a family where they ate out every day. And you just got whatever, whenever, and then you got these expectations. So here's what I'm going to do. And in my house, everybody help with chores. No, my mom did all the chores. And you have these expectations that come together, and they're never verbalized. No, you're just supposed to know. They don't, and so they have this conflict of expectations. Here's her expectations. Here's his expectations. They don't line up. They've never been communicated, and they're like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. But when we understand that the person has a different personality, when we understand, one of the things that we use as a tool to help marriages is the love languages, the 5 love languages. And it's basically a book and a system by Dr. Gary Chapman. There's an app that you can do that I'll use to help me think through my wife's love language. And the 5 love languages are up there. They're words of affirmation. That simply means speaking words that are encouraging over their lives. And again, this can work in every relationship. So this could be, hey, hon, you mowed the grass really good. Look at those lines. They're so straight. Man, don't nobody mow the grass like you mow the grass. Any guys feel that way? Like if she just notices and say, wow, look how straight those lines are. Or whatever it is that, for me, I'm a words of affirmation person. So, somebody came up to me after last service and said, Pastor, I loved how you broke down. Again, it's got to be specific, too. It can't be just like, you did good. Well, how did I do good? Tell me about it. And when you broke that down, man, you talked about that myth of this and this and this and this. Man, could you do a whole sermon on that? Oh, yeah, I did good. I feel loved. Then there's acts of service. That just simply means doing things for that person. That's one of my wife's love languages. That's not one of my love languages, though. Right? I could care, my wife loves to I'm going to serve. I'm like, I don't feel loved that way. And so the tension comes in that there's 2 people who feel love in different ways, because I've rarely met a couple where they're both like, yes, we're 100%. We have the same love languages. I haven't met one. Maybe you're here and that's you, but I haven't met one. So physical touch, and that can be just holding hands, hugs, fist bumps, just being around the person. I have a daughter this is one of mine too. It's like, she just wants to be attached to you constantly, even if she's sweaty and sticky, and you're like, ah. She used to smother her brother, when he was a newborn, and like, he's still breathing though, it's okay. It's like, that's not the bar of physical touch, the line. It's not the, and sometimes the worst thing you could do for those kids is spank them, because they're just like, when it comes to a words of affirmation kid, if you tell them like, hey, you're a loser or something like that, they're like, you ruin everything. It's like, it works in the reverse too. Quality time, that's just uninterrupted attention and time. That's another one of my wife's. It's like uninterrupted, 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 uninterrupted. uninterrupted. You know, I don't have to have this thing right here all the time. I could enjoy the moment, going back to enjoy the moment. You know, this can be, we miss the moment. We miss the moment. Put it down. Quality time. And then the other one's gifts. And when you think about gifts, it's not talking about, it doesn't have to be big, extravagant gifts. It just means something, a token that says, hey, I'm thinking of you. It could be if you're traveling and you pick up something for one of your kids or your spouse and just like a little something, a little something. And all of us receive love in some of in a degree to all of these, but understanding who you are helps you. If you understand the other person, it helps you to love them. Because again, I can't just be like, well, hon, I told you you were beautiful and you were amazing and you're the best wife letter. And I wrote a letter and I wrote a poem for you. Like, don't you feel loved? No. Because that's the way I love. Now, still, it doesn't mean I don't do that. She has to know that that's the way I love. But I have to work to love her in the way she feels loved. And she has to work. Like, hey, I baked you a cake. Aren't you happy I did acts of service? And I'm like, oh, that's great. That cake is great. Look how amazing it is. Wow, it really looks like Chewbacca. I don't know how you did that. But that's how she gives love. So, number 1, enjoy the journey. 2, don't compete. 3, be Christ-centered. 4, put the other first. And then number 5, this is kind of my best one, really, for me. This is my life mantra. Is this: you reap what you sow. And I say it this way, but I wanted to simplify it for you. Everything is equity in life. Everything in life. And you'll hear me if you've ever sat down and talked. I believe everything is equity. Everything is equity, simply meaning this: you get what you plant. In Galatians 6:7, the writer Paul writes this. He says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. In other words, you can't get around this no matter how shifty you are, how smart you are, how many plans you have. You don't get around this. For whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. Now again, when my grandma used to read this, she would say it like this. When we was being naughty, talking mean to each other, teasing each other, you better watch out! You're going to reap what you sow. And it's like, ah! We thought that was the worst scripture in the Bible. Like, we're going to reap what we sow. And it could be for you. Or this could be the best scripture in the Bible. I'm going to reap what I sow. Come on. Yes. Yes. And we see this principle way back in Genesis. God sets this principle over the earth in Genesis 8. He says this. He says, while the earth remains, he said, this is a law for eternity. Seed time and harvest. Seed time and harvest. Seed time and harvest. He said, this is a principle forever. Everything is equity. Everything. And here's the problem when it comes to marriage, why we struggle with this is because we believe in this. We believe in that if it's the right person, it should just be amazing. And it should be good. And it should be easy. Because I found the one. And if I can find the one, it will be easy. No work. Just the one. Just love. All we need is love. Love is all we need. That's a myth. And in fact, the myth comes into the Bible, or to the church. It isn't from the Bible, but it comes into the church. And this is what happened. Actually, this was the most complimented thing after service. People came up and said, what? I didn't know that. Do you know that the idea of like there is a destined one for you is not biblical at all? But I believe in predestination, Pastor. Okay. But there's the one. I've always heard the one. You got to find the one. You got to find the one. The one is there. God has preordained it. Here's the one. Nowhere in Scripture does that ever come up. Sorry to burst your bubble, but not really sorry. I lied. I like bursting bubbles. Do you know where that comes from? Greek mythology. There's like 5,000 practitioners today of the Greek mythology religion. Like nobody's like, oh, Lord Zeus. But we live like we're practitioners of Greek mythology, because you know where the idea of the one comes from is like Zeus and the other gods and the Titans looked down upon the earth and said, they're too powerful for us. They might overtake Olympus. So we must separate their soul being into two parts, and they must spend their whole life trying to find the one. And once they get with the one, they'll fight with the one, and they will be too distracted to overtake Olympus. Does anybody live their life like that? Then why are we saying like? Because the idea is if there's the one that God ordained, like it will be just easy. Instead of realizing this, you have to work hard. You know, during COVID and the lockdown, lots of people picked up gardening that were never gardening before. And it's a lot of work, y'all. You never see a lazy farmer because they don't make it. It's a lot of work. Sewing is a lot of work. And you know, you got people, and there's this like a little, you know, meme thing that's like, you spend $250 to buy all the gardening supplies to build the garden, to get the right soil, to get all the things. And then, you know, in 3 months, you're going to have one 25-cent vegetable to enjoy after all that. That's about life, y'all. That's about life. Because we have to work at it. Think of it this way. Going back to everything is equity. In my bank account right now is I have my debit card, and I can go to a store, put in my debit card, it deducts the money out of my account. I know, revolutionary, right? But here's the thing. I must have enough money in my account, right, kids, to cover how much I'm going to spend. What happens if I spend more than I make? Decline. Do you have another card, sir? And what happens as a society and families if we spend more than we make? We get in debt and we have America, right? But that's a new concept. That's not how God ever intended it to be. Like, oh, you're just so far in debt and you just spend it more. Open up another card. Max out that one. Again, I'm not here to condemn you, but that's dumb. Because that's not how God intended for it to work. You're trying to mock God. Going back to Galatians 6. He said, no, this is how this works. Let's go to another area. I can tell y'all aren't very excited about that one. Let's find another one you won't be excited about. When it comes to health, I'm a runner. I can't just eat whatever I want to eat all the time. I have to manage how many calories go in and how many I burn. Right? And they have to be good calories. And I've lost 30 pounds just by managing, like, I need to burn more than I put in. Right? That's one. Maybe it's in the soul realm. We can't fill our lives full of garbage. What we watch, what we consume, what we read, what we hear, and expect that the rule of garbage in, garbage out won't apply to us. And when it comes to relationally, let's not even go there yet. Let's talk about our church experience, our spirituality. You know, one of the things that we talk about is to worship God, we're giving of our time, our talent, our treasure. And often what we want with our church experience is we want a fine dining experience with fast food investment. We want the fine dining food with fast food ingredients. We're like, why are we getting a fast food experience? Well, we had a fast food investment. And I love Food Network. I love watching it. And if you've ever heard of something called a Michelin star. Michelin star, there's only 200 restaurants, less than 200 restaurants in the United States with a Michelin star. Again, you could Google it later. But they have certain criteria for a Michelin star. There's less than 200, and it goes from 1 to 3 stars. There are only 14 Michelin star restaurants in the United States, and you can lose your stars if it's not consistent, if you don't keep it up. Only 14, and guess what? Sorry, y'all. There's none in Texas. So you can't go out afterwards and get it. Popeyes is not on the list. Bill Miller's is not on the list. Sorry, Luby's is not on the list. But they have to have a good experience for people. And often we want a Michelin star marriage, but we want to make a McDonald's investment. We want Michelin star results with McDonald's ingredients. Let me tell you about a Michelin star. One of the things is they actually look at the quality of their ingredients that they put into the food. They don't buy from the same vendor who supplies whatever's in chicken nuggets. So if we want a fine dining experience, we have to upgrade from fast food thinking. We have to invest. We have to invest. We have to invest of our time, of our talent, of our treasure. Just like we invest into our spiritual experience. Some of us, the reason we're not having a great church experience is because we're like, I'm nothing ventured, nothing gained. We're sowing nothing, and we're like, why am I reaping nothing? God is not mocked. Anywhere in my life where I'm like, why am I reaping nothing? Or why am I reaping this? Oh. And there's things that happen, but in generally, when we understand that, is this. And here, why is it cost more to eat at fine dining than it costs to eat at McDonald's? Why does it cost more to eat at a Michelin star restaurant? Has anyone here ever eaten at a Michelin star restaurant? I have not. Why does it cost more? Because value is determined by what someone is willing to pay for it. What do the investments that you're making into your relationships say about the value you place upon it? If I had to look and open up of your time, talent, and treasure that you've poured into relationships, what would that tell me about the value that you have, that you've placed upon it? Is it valued? Is it fine dining? Or is it fast food? So if that's the only thing you get out of today, I know 5 things were kind of scattered all over, and this is a different message than usual. That's my question for you. You want fine dining? You want fast food? Let's pray. Father God, we thank you. Lord, help us to have Michelin marriages. Help us to have fine dining relationships. Help us to, even in our spiritual walk, realize that we reap what we sow. Help us to put others first. Help us to be keeping you at the center, Lord. Help us to not compete with one another, that we know that we are accepted in heaven, that we are made right, not because of anything we've done, but because of what you've already done. And help us to enjoy and rejoice always